Welcome to this session, Java Life is Short. So this session, I'm going to go through some few different tools, all based on open source projects, to kind of work on your developer joy and productivity with open source. So these guys are pretty excited. I hope you are too. Love this picture. So a little disclaimer. This is an opinionated talk. And get a lot of feedback here. Maybe that's better. This is an opinionated talk. Is that good? All right. This, so I'm going to go through a few tools. There's a lot more. There's a lot more ways that you can be more productive, how you can have more developer joy, of course, with Java. So I'm going to go through a few that I really like, kind of starting from local development, and then how we can deploy our application and everything. So, but don't shoot me if you didn't see your favorite tool. There's just too many, right? So we'll jump right in. So my name is Kevin Dubois. I'm a developer advocate at Red Hat, hence the T-shirt, of course. So I've been in the software industry about 18 years, mostly as a software engineer. And also the guy that got stuck having to work on containerizing applications and deploying applications and dealing with getting called at 3 a.m. in the morning and everything. So I'm happy doing this job. I don't have to do that anymore. Anyway, so my passion really is about developer experience with open source, and open source really close to my heart. And fortunately, I work at Red Hat, where that's all we do is open source, right? You can find me on all those different channels. I'll share that at the end as well. I'll share the slides as well. But yeah, so I saw this this morning, right, in the keynote. Welcome to JNation. And so here we go, JNation. Everybody has seen this, I'm sure, at some point in their life. You get started with Java. And you have your hello world, and so just to create a hello world, you would have to know, what are classes, what is public versus private, what is a static method? Well, what's a method first of all? What is this void return type? Then there's these arguments that aren't even used in this hello world. So there's a lot to take in to get started with Java, right? And so Java itself is aware of that as well. There's in Java 21 there's some new changes coming up to have unnamed classes and to make this a little bit simpler. But this is what most of us have started with, right? So you would create this hello world, and then you'd have to do your Java compile, and then finally you can run it to get your hello world. So there's a lot going on. So one tool that I like that is a lot easier to get started with is Jbang. So who's heard of Jbang here? Wow, just like one or two hands. That's cool. So Jbang is a really cool project. So you can get started with Java quite easily. So you can do, for example, Jbang init and then some name, and it'll create a Java file, scaffold some stuff, and you can run it, with Jbang. So you Jbang whatever, and it'll do your compilation and packaging kind of for you. So we're gonna do some demos here today, and so I can show you exactly how it works. So you can do Jbang init hello Portugal .java. And so, by doing that, I actually created a Hello Portugal file. And, this will look pretty similar, right? Still our hello world. Shouldn't it say Hello Portugal, though? I'm disappointed in you, Jbang. But so what you see here is, this is generated by Jbang kind of as a way to get started pretty quickly. But you'll see also at the top, you see that / user bin, blah, blah, blah. And so that also allows you, if you're in Bash or in your shell, to just run this file, and I don't have to compile it or anything, so I can do hello Portugal, and well, shocker, it shows the hello world that we created, right? But so Jbang is not just like to create hello worlds. You can actually do some more cool stuff with it. So you can init and then use a template. So there's, for example, a CLI template. So Jbang init with a template CLI, and then let's call this CLI script, whatever, .java. And so again, it created a file, and so CLI script.java. If we look at it, hey, this is pretty cool, right? So it included Pico CLI. So if you're familiar with maybe creating CLI scripts with Java, you'll probably have come across Pico CLI. And so it scaffolds all this cool stuff to create, shocker, and again a hello world, but this time with a CLI script. So again, we can run this. Quit, and then CLI script.java, and of course it does hello world. But if you looked at the script here, you could see that there was a parameter that we could have passed in. So we could have done CLI script.java. I need to do that. CLI script.java, and if we do -help, we can actually see that it shows me the parameters that you can insert, and so we could have done Portugal instead of world, Portugal, and then it says hello Portugal. So we can get up and running pretty easily with creating CLI scripts with Java, which why not? Especially with some of the cool new features in Java to do, for example, native compilation and everything. This is actually Java can be used for CLI scripts pretty well. So there's one other kind of, I don't know if it's cool or gimmicky or something, but what you can do with Jbang is you can also interact with GPT API. So it's a preview. So you do Jbang preview init and GPT demo, let's call it that. And then you can say, hey, create a script that takes a number as a parameter and returns the square root. So this is going to go out to the GPT API. So let's see if the internet works and if GPT answers. So all I had to do is create an account with OpenAI, and then you can get an API key. So you just set that in your environment variables, and that's how it works. So let's see what it created, because every time I run this, it creates something different. So it may or may not work. So let's see what it did, right? So we can see that it created a file, and so you can also, I was going to say, this one doesn't have any dependencies, which is a little suspicious, because it's calling math, but it doesn't have the import. So I suspect this one is not going to work. So let's see, GPT demo. We'll give it a number, and well, it actually did work. OK, all right. It's smarter than me. Wow. All right, so the square root of of 10 is 3.16, whatever. So you can create scripts quickly and easily with GPT. Now, would I do this for running production files without blindly looking at what it generated? Probably not. But it's kind of cool and handy to get started with Java. So that's Jbang. So we can do a lot more stuff. Actually, you can use dependencies with Jbang as comments in your Jbang file, so you don't need to create a pom.xml or a Gradle or anything. It can use those dependencies directly in your file. So for self-contained Java applications, this is actually a really cool way and easy way to get to work. So that's Jbang. So I showed you also the GPT. I had some examples in case the internet wasn't working or something. So for example, you could say print a cat, and it creates this cute little kitty, or create a currency converter or something. And so those are some things that you can do with that. So moving on from Jbang, so I'm playing around with that. Going to a little bit of a different direction here. So who's working with Java? Let's see, Java 8. Anybody here? Yeah, we see hands, Java 8. So managing multiple versions, so yeah, maybe some of the projects that we're working on are still using Java 8. Some newer projects are using Java 11. Then we have maybe some other projects we're working on, state-of-the-art Java 17, even though it's been around for quite a while. And then maybe we're also experimenting with Java 20, 21 that's going to come out soon. But so then you have to, kind of switch between the different Java versions, right? Which is kind of not so easy. Let's say, maybe you also have like a vendor-supported version of Java that you need to have, or there's GraalVM. I saw Alina here somewhere. And so, you have to maintain all those different versions. So one way you could do that is with SDKMAN. I really like SDKMAN to manage my Java versions, because I can install different Java versions very easily, and I can switch between versions pretty easily. So you can do, for example, SDK list. So SDK is, the CLI command for SDKMAN, and so you can do list Java, and then, it'll list, of course, what versions of Java are available through SDKMAN. And so, let's see what that does, right? SDK list Java. And you can see, a whole bunch of different versions of Java that you can use. So you can see versions of 21, 11, 8, even some, 22 release candidates for, different vendors. So you have, your Amazon Corretto or your OpenJDK or your Oracle or your Temurin from the Adaptium project and everything. So, there's lots of options there. And then you can say SDK install Java. Because I want to test out Java, 21, let's see. And so if I do SDK install Java 21 and I hit tab, then I see all the different versions of Java 21 that are available. And so I can do, Java 21, let's say, dot. I'm lacking inspiration here, the dot two, and then we'll see, there's 3 different versions. So there's, for example, Mandrill, which is an upstream version of GraalVM, and then so now I'm installing Java 21 provided by, this project. And then it's downloading this version of Java, and, I don't have patience for that, so we'll just do SDK. Well, actually, let's see what Java version is installed on my machine. So we can see right now I have OpenJDK 17. So if I want to switch to a different version of Java that I need to use for a particular project, I can do Java use, Java, let's see, use, yeah. It's not Java use, SDK use, that's why. Okay, SDK use, and then I can see the versions that I have already installed on my machine, which, I have a version of 11, Temurin, and I have 17, and I have 20. So, maybe I want to switch to Java 20 right now from OpenJDK. And so now, if I use Java, I can see that I'm running version 20. So I can switch between Java versions pretty quickly and easily with SDKMAN, which is pretty cool. Now, remember Jbang that I was talking about earlier? So you can actually also install JVM-based projects with SDKMAN as well. So, SDK install, and then, Jbang, for example. And then again, if we tab, then we can see all the different versions, which there are many of. So let's see, 107 is the latest version. So SDK install Jbang, and now I'm installing Jbang, which incidentally I already had installed, but and again, I can switch between different versions. So you can do this for some other JVM projects like Maven, so if you want to switch between different versions of Maven, maybe you want to try out Maven 4, play around with it a little bit, and so you can do that. Jbang, Quarkus CLI as well, so SDKMAN is a pretty cool project. So our cycle of development, typically in the Java world is, we're coding, then we need to compile, then we need to deploy, and finally we can run our application and test it, and then repeat, right? So every time we have to recompile, which isn't so fun to do that manually. So there's a few different ways you can eliminate that. Well, eliminate isn't the right word because it's still happening, but we can eliminate having to do it ourselves, right? So, I'm very biased towards Quarkus. I think Quarkus is really cool. But Quarkus does really make this a lot easier, right? So, who here is, let's say, who here, knows about Quarkus? Yes, yeah, I like that. I like to see that. And who uses Quarkus? Fair amount. In production? Sorry for keeping it. All right, that's a good amount, so about, 30%. So for those of you, this is not going to be super exciting, but I'm just going to do a little sidetrack with Quarkus, and then we're moving on to other projects where I may or may not mention some more Quarkus. But what's really cool with Quarkus is that you can get up and running really easily. So let's start with that. So I'll clear. So you have a Quarkus CLI. You can also use Quarkus extensions or plugins in your VS Code or IntelliJ or whatever. But you can just create a project, Quarkus create app, and give it some name. Let's call it test in this case. And so just by doing that, I created an application, so we can go and look at it. I'll use VS Code in this case, maybe. And so if we go look, and I hope this is big enough for you in the back, I scaffolded a project that has even a REST resource that says hello from REST Easy Reactive. And so what's really cool with Quarkus is if I want to be developing on my local machine, I can just do Quarkus dev or Maven Quarkus dev, and I start up my project in dev mode. And as this dev mode is running, I don't have to refresh and recompile or anything. Well, I do have to refresh, but not recompile anymore. So we can do hello from Portugal again. So we like Portugal, right? All right, so just by doing that, of course, if I go to my browser and we go to localhost 8080, because our live mode started our application, yay, we have a Quarkus application, and we have a REST endpoint which says, well, no surprise there, hello Portugal. And if we did, some more exclamation points, because we really like Portugal, refresh, So I didn't have to recompile or anything, so I can have a much quicker feedback. Now, there's also continuous testing. So, you see there at the bottom it says R to resume testing. So that's one way to enable this continuous testing. And we can see actually, because we like to, as developers, we like to work on our code and, build cool stuff. And then afterwards, we realize when we do our Maven package, that all these tests are failing because we forgot there are unit tests. Well, ideally, there are unit tests. So what's really nice with the continuous testing is as I'm developing, I get quick feedback that something isn't, that a test is failing. Because, when I created my Quarkus application, it was nice enough to create this test as well. So we need to fix our test. And so hello, Portugal, with 3 exclamation points, I think. And so I'm not doing anything else, and we can see, OK, our test is passing now, which is great. And so now if I'm developing more exclamation points, even cooler, and then we get an immediate feedback, hey, one of your code changes is making a test fail. And it's smart enough to know that it doesn't need to rerun all the tests, right? So you don't have to rerun all the tests. It knows which class was affected and stuff like that. So we get a nice, quick feedback loop of developing. So let's fix that again, and our test is passing. So that's the live mode of Quarkus that I really like, to kind of accelerate our development. So another project that I really like is TestContainers. Who's using TestContainers right now? OK. All right. So let's say about 15, 20%. So TestContainers is a really cool project because it allows you to, test, of course, with containers. Yes, it's all in the name. But basically, you have maybe a dependency on a database, or you have, dependency on Kafka or some messaging system or some other, tool that you would have to install on your local machine to be able to run your testing, or worse, you're running in your continuous integration pipeline, and now you have to have some sort of database running somewhere for your pipeline. And so how are you going to handle that if you want to run multiple tests in different versions with different schemas and everything? So it becomes rather complicated. So TestContainers actually spins up a container as you're running your tests, with that dependency or multiple dependencies that your tests depend on. Just so if you need a database, it'll create a database in a container. Have your test, use that database, and then tear it down after your test, so you're not using those resources anymore. So for testing, this is pretty cool. Now, going back, to Quarkus, if you combine Quarkus with test containers, it becomes even cooler because then you have dev services, which basically means Quarkus is using test containers not just to run your tests, but actually as you're developing as well. So you can, for example, I'm creating an application that has a dependency on a database, but it's kind of a pain to install a database on your local machine, and then it has to be the right version, and blah, blah, blah. And so what's cool with Quarkus is if you define a dependency and extension for, let's say, a Postgres database, it'll notice that, hey, you're not actually running it. So as you start up that live mode that I was just showing, it's going to just create the container with it. So let's see that in action real quick. So I have another little project. So I cheated a little bit by already creating it, Quarkus with DB. And then let's do it in VS Code. It's a little easier to see. So here I have pretty much the same application. Let's see what's code dot. There we go. And so here I have an application that has just a really simple kind of REST endpoint that returns some fruits from a database. So I have this fruit entity here that returns the name and a season of a fruit. Very basic. If you're familiar with Quarkus and ORM with Panache, you can see here that it's, that's a pretty cool extension too, where I don't have to create getters and setters, but that's kind of beside the point. So right now I have this application. So I don't have a database running on my local machine. So if we go to, Podman Desktop, which is kind of like Docker Desktop, but more free and open source, you can see there's no container running, right? There's only this Jaeger all-in-one that'll be for a next demo, but there's no container running. So if I go back to my application and I say Quarkus dev, because just to show you, in my POM, I have my dependency here somewhere, Quarkus, JDBC, Postgres. And so just by having that dependency, when I start up my Quarkus dev, my application will start up, and Quarkus will notice that, hey, you don't have the database running on your local machine. And so you can see here, if you look quickly, that it's starting up a Postgres database in a container. And now we're running the application, and we can see here that this test containers is running, and we can see it started up a Postgres database. So it just did that automatically. I didn't have to do anything. So if we go now to our localhost 8080/fruit, we can see, well, it's returning, some JSON from my database that's running. And so, let's say that we kill the database. We stop it. I don't know if it's going to restart, but we'll see. Refresh, and so now it's not working anymore because I stopped that database just to show you that it really is using the container that was started up, right? Okay, so I'll start that up. Hopefully I didn't mess up test containers too much. And so, yeah, and again, I get quick feedback of what's going on. So that's the dev services of Quarkus. So you can use test containers as well with Spring. You can use it with other frameworks, so you don't necessarily need Quarkus. But the dev services is pretty cool because I don't have to configure anything. It just kind of happens. So right now I've done kind of my local development. I've created something with Jbang, and then maybe another project with Quarkus, and did my local development with local containers and everything. And so now let's say my application is ready and I want to move to my outer loop, right? So inner loop is local development. Outer loop is once you create your merge request and you go into your cycle where somebody might do a peer review, and you'll go through your continuous integration and continuous delivery and all that stuff. So let's see where we can be more productive as Java developers in that loop too, because to be honest, it's nice to have, to just do your development and kind of throw it over the wall, and somebody else needs to deploy it. But then the problem is afterwards, it always comes back, right? Because there's some issues, and now you're going to have to do some debugging on production or something. That's not ideal. We want to have some more, not necessarily control, but definitely some more influence on that outer loop as well as Java developers. And so, of course, in the new world, that means we need to know a little bit about containers and Kubernetes and serverless cloud and everything. And so, then we need to be experts in any of these tools, perhaps, right? So maybe you build containers with Docker or with Podman, or you use Jib. Jib is a pretty cool project, so you can build containers with Java. You don't necessarily need Docker, but you still need to know how Jib works, right? Or you can use Canico or Buildpacks or Builda and a whole bunch of different projects. But so that's not so easy, right? We like to focus on our code. The talk is Java life is short, not DevOps life is short or something, right? So, yeah, I always go back to Quarkus because it helps in that regard too. Because when I'm developing and I want to create a container image, really with Quarkus, all I have to do is Quarkus image build, and I'll create a container image. So, well, let's see if that works, right? Quarkus image build. I hope this is big enough. If not, oops, now it's even less visible. All right, I'm just gonna do it. Quarkus image build, and by doing that, so the same project that I was using with the database, and we can see it's doing the compilation, and it's actually building my application, and now I have a container image that was just built. So if we go back to our Podman Desktop and we look at the images, we can see here a container image was created just a few seconds ago. So I didn't have to do anything else. The only thing is that with Quarkus, that I do have to mention is that Quarkus provides you with some Docker files as you get started. So if you scaffold a project with Quarkus, it'll give you some Docker files out of the box that are using kind of base images that are supplied, well, in this case by Red Hat. So there's a universal base image that's maintained and tested and everything. But that's a pretty nice start if you want to build containers. So there's the one for running Quarkus as a regular JVM application. You can compile Quarkus down to a native application, and there's a Docker file for that. And so all I'd have to do if I wanted to do my application as a natively compiled application in a container, Quarkus image build -- native, and it would do all that for me, which is pretty handy too, I think. And then maybe I like using Jib, for example. Then well, you can just do Quarkus image build Jib, and it'll build your application with Jib. And same, Docker or Buildpacks, kind of the same deal. The only thing is with Buildpacks, I think you do need to do a little bit of configuration. So now we have our container image that we're running, and we could even go to Podman Desktop and say, hey, start up this application, and then let's see if it works. So it maps my port, and the resolution is quite big, so there we go, start container. So now I'm running that same container image, and we can go, to localhost 8080, where it's running as a container this time, and we can see that, well, it's running. And we're gonna see that if we go to our fruit endpoint, it's not gonna work. Why? Because, well, that database that Quarkus automatically spins up in dev mode, well, it doesn't do that in production. We don't want to have random containers of databases starting up in production. And basically, this container image is production ready, let's say. So I'd have to start up a container to match that. So what we can do is we can deploy our application right now, and so we can deploy typically newer projects oftentimes will go to Kubernetes, and now we need to be Kubernetes experts and YAML, right? Yes. So I know a little bit about Kubernetes, but this is a very kind of basic way of deploying an application where you have a deployment with some configuration of what image to use and how many instances and blah, blah, blah. And then you have to have a service that, to route the traffic to it. And then you have to have some ingress or whatever. So it's, not so easy, of course. So you could create it like this. There's some tools that help you with deploying to Kubernetes, of course. And so, yeah, I'm always going back to Quarkus because, again, has a really cool and handy extension for that. So Quarkus extension add Kubernetes will add the capability to deploy and to interact with Kubernetes. So Quarkus extension add, or we can do, like use the plugin too. So we can do add extensions, and then we can search through whatever extensions are available. And so we can see, well, there's Kubernetes, there's a client, there's one for configuration and all that. But yeah, let's just stick with the basics, Kubernetes, and let's add that to our project. And then just by doing that, if I now do my Maven package, Quarkus will generate in my target a Kubernetes folder that has the YAML to deploy to Kubernetes. And so let's see. It's running through its tests here in the terminal, but I had already done this. I cheated a little bit. So you can see here, hey, here's exactly that service. Here's the deployment. And so I can push this to a Kubernetes cluster pretty easily. And actually, you can make it even easier with Quarkus. You could do Quarkus deploy. And if you already have logged into a Kubernetes cluster, so I have one running here, which happens to be an OpenShift sandbox cluster. So you go to developers.redhat.com and then get a free sandbox, and then start your sandbox. So you just have to create a free account, which I already did. And then here's my Kubernetes cluster. This one's based on OpenShift, which is kind of an implementation of Kubernetes. And you can see no resources are found. So let's deploy our application. So I can do Quarkus deploy, or I can do Kubernetes, or I can do kubectl apply. That YAML is going to do basically the same thing. So we're going to do Quarkus deploy. And because I'm already logged into this cluster, or at least I was, let's see if I still am. Looks like I am. Build success, and now we can see, hey, cool, my application is deployed to Kubernetes. So as a Java developer, I didn't need to know much about Kubernetes, right? I just needed to know Quarkus deploy and have it in my dev environment. Now, again, we have the same problem though, because I don't have database running. So if I go to my fruit endpoint, and yeah, if you are very quick at reading and writing, you can actually go to this URL. This application is running and publicly available right now. And so if I go to /fruit, we're going to see that we have issues because there's no database running. So maybe let's add one real quick. Database. And it was a Postgres database. And I need to set the username, which was Quarkus, the password, which is Quarkus, and the database, which was Quarkus. I'm very original like that. That's actually the default. So if you just add a database extension to your project, the container that it starts up, that's the default values that it's going to use for your configuration. So you can override those, of course. But you can see now database is starting up, and in a little bit we'll see that that everything, well, hopefully is running right. A red circle that doesn't that doesn't look very promising though. Moving on. So I can deploy to Kubernetes with Quarkus, or there's some other projects, of course. This is really not the only way. You can use, another one that I really like is Knative. Knative is a way to deploy, to use Kubernetes in a serverless way. So you can push applications to Kubernetes, and they'll scale down to 0, wait for requests, and then scale up as there are requests, which is really cool. So you can use serverless on Kubernetes without being tied to a specific vendor, right? Because it's just anywhere where you can run Kubernetes. But let's move on to our next project, which is MicroProfile. So who's familiar with MicroProfile here? Okay, so we have, about, let's say, 15% or so. So MicroProfile is a project, so it's a collaboration of, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, Red Hat, even some jugs. And so basically, to come together to create a spec to use Java in a cloud-native world. And so, how can we have a common specification to do to work with OpenAPI, or how do we create REST clients, or how do we do configuration in our, with our Kubernetes, or how do we do health endpoints, for example. And so MicroProfile is a specification, to have everybody kind of use the same standards. And then, you have implementations of MicroProfile. So for example, there's the small Rye project, which is an implementation of MicroProfile, which is used by Quarkus. So what we could do, and I didn't really show that, but and actually this is a good example where my database isn't running, but it shows that my application is fine. It says it's running, it's happy, but it's not, right? Because it doesn't have the database. So actually, it should tell Kubernetes that this application may be running, but it's not able to accept the requests because there's some dependencies not working right. So what you would want to do is you want to create some health endpoints to your application that Kubernetes can use. So there's this liveness probes and readiness probes that Kubernetes uses to be able to see whether an application is ready to accept requests. And so you can do that, by, for example, using small Rye health, which is an extension that, for example, you can use with Quarkus. So small Rye health. And if I add this extension and I rebuild my application, we're going to see that in my Kubernetes YAML, it's going to add some more stuff. Let's see if it happens in real time here. So let's give it a second here and see if it's going to happen. We need some drum rolls. Nobody brought their drum here? OK, here we go. Did you see it? It added liveness probes and readiness probes automatically. And then you can add annotations to specific methods to add maybe that it needs to listen for this database connection or something. So you can expand this a little bit more. But kind of out of the box, it already added these liveness and readiness probes, which are very important on Kubernetes. But again, look at all that YAML that you'd have to write. Ain't nobody got time for that. So that's MicroProfile. So not just health endpoints, right? It has a bunch more specifications that you can use in cloud native, but we don't have time for all that. So now let's say we released our application, it's running on production, and so we're done, right? We're good. Everything is fine. We don't need to monitor anything, right? Maybe not, right? Because we need to have insight into how is our application behaving. What's what's the performance? Are there any errors? How can we improve our application? And so we need to add observability to our project, which is also a concern for Java developers to add to the application. So you can use projects like OpenTelemetry and Micrometer. Those are two projects that make it quite easy to work, to add observability to your project. So I have another little project here. Let's close the terminal. My terminal has disappeared. That's fine. Let's just close this and go back here. So I have another project, cd ... Quarkus observability, and I have cd Quarkus observability, and these different little projects. I did push them to my GitHub. So if you want to go look a little bit more into what it is and everything, feel free to. I'll share the link at the end. So here we have an application where I've added a few extensions. So I've added the Quarkus OpenTelemetry extension. I added the OpenTelemetry JDBC, and I added Quarkus Micrometer and Quarkus Micrometer Registry Prometheus. And by adding those extensions, I gain a lot of data that I can expose on my application to expose metrics, in terms of what my application is doing, what the garbage collector is doing, and everything. And in terms of tracing as well. So, like if you get a request in, they said, yeah, on production, this customer had this problem. Here's the transaction ID. Go and figure it out. So by adding OpenTelemetry, you get kind of a lot of those capabilities out of the box. So we can run this even on our local machine. So I'll do Quarkus dev and start up this project. And so what I did here is I have a very similar application. So I have my Java, my fruit resource here, my entity, and my fruit resource. And you can see here, there's a timed annotation that I added. So this is something that is provided by my Micrometer. And so it allows you to, for example, time this particular method. So we can go look. I don't know what this error message is. I think because I need to start my Jaeger for my observability. So, all right, so let's see. Let's go to our localhost 8080 fruits, and which is airing out, so that's cool. I didn't pray enough to the demo gods for this one. So yeah, so this application would run, and I suspect that there's Quarkus running somewhere. Yep, here we go. Let's kill that one. It's probably blocking the port. So let's go back to our application. Start it up in Quarkus dev mode again. Let's see if this time it'll be happy. So again, it's starting up a database, right? Our Postgres database. And so that takes a little bit to spin up that container, and then we'll see that in just a moment. Yep. Hit refresh. All right, so now we have another fruit endpoint. I'm hitting refresh a couple times just so I can go look at our metrics. So by default, if I'm running in, if I add Micrometer, it'll add a metrics endpoint. And so here you can see a whole bunch of data, right? I'm not necessarily going to be reading that, but this is something that your Prometheus or whatever tool that you're using for metrics and observability can ingest, and then you can show it on a Grafana or whatever to see stats on stuff. So we can see, for example, our method, which was let's look for fruit. And so we can see here that, just by adding this extension, this annotation, we can see that I guess I hit refresh 12 times. This was the average time that it took for this application and stuff like that. So you can insert all of that. And then if we go to our tracing here, so this is Jaeger, which is the way to do tracing. We can select our service, which is our demo app, which is running. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And then I can go look at the traces that it produced. And you can see here that today, a minute ago, there was a request that I made. And you can go look at, the exact details of this request, how long it took, what methods it called. And you can even see, for example, that it called a database and it did a select and how long that took and everything. So you get a lot of metrics and data kind of out of the box with that. So that's how you add observability to your application, which I highly recommend you do. And so these were applications that we deployed to let's say a cloud native environment, to Kubernetes, where we need all those data. But let's say you're maybe building a completely different application. Maybe you're doing a CLI application, or you're using like JavaFX to do a desktop application. And then, you need to distribute your application. So how are you going to do that? In a way where every time you release a new version, you're going to need to, advertise that there's a new version. You need to push it somewhere. You need to probably create checksums somewhere. So that's a lot of different things that you need to do to release a distributed application. So one project that's really cool to help with that is JReleaser. So JReleaser allows you to, make these releases a lot more easy. So for example, by helping you push the releases to a specific, to a specific location, like GitHub or to SDKMAN, and maybe send some notifications to Twitter or to some other channel, to your Slack channel, like, hey, this version was released. And so, you can create a configuration that does that. So for example, I have this project where I did that. So let's stop this one. And this is a very basic application, of course. But let's go back to our CLI, our good old CLI. And I have the Quarkus JReleaser. What an original name. Quarkus JReleaser. And so basically what I did was, so you can create this in YAML, you can create this in JSON, in TOML, or you can add some values to your pom.xml or to Gradle to generate release data. So for example, here we can see that, well, I have developers, Kevin, and I have a license, and then we can see here that I added some information to how I'm going to assemble my application, how I'm going to package it, and how I'm going to make a distribution, for example, to create a Windows distribution or a Linux distribution. And in this case, I'm just going to create a binary on Linux because that's what I'm running here on my local machine. And so let's say I want to release this version. And so what I would need to do is Maven. So we're going to do a native compilation. Let's see if we have time for this. It should be pretty quick. And then comma dist. So I want to use my profile that creates the distribution. And then we're going to package this application. So by doing that, I'm packaging my application. And I'm doing a native compilation of my Java application. So if you're not familiar with native compilation, basically you're compiling it down to a binary where I don't need a JVM to run my application, which for distributed applications is actually quite interesting, right? So if I distribute my application as a Java application, the people who are using it don't have to have, some sort of a JVM running on their local machine. So it can just be a regular Linux binary that it's going to deploy. Now, unfortunately, there's a new version of this container image, but it's actually pretty cool because I don't have graalvm, which is a way to do this native compilation running on my local machine. And so Quarkus saw that and is like, OK, well, we'll pull down a container image that has mandrel, which is kind of implementation of graalvm. And we'll do our native compilation in a container. So you don't need to worry about having graalvm installed on your local machine and having the right version. So now it's doing that compilation in a container running on my local machine. So we could probably see it here in Podman Desktop. So the build native container here, which is running, which is doing this compilation of my Java application, which is going to take just a minute, and I have 2 minutes left, so this is going to really come down to the wire. We'll see. In the meantime, let's wrap it up, and then we'll go back to that thing. So in this session, you saw a lot of different tools, right? It was kind of chaotic, maybe, but we saw SDKMAN, we saw Jbang, we saw we saw quite a bit of Quarkus, and again, I used Quarkus to show some of these tools, but these tools can be used independently from Quarkus. So, so for example, OpenTelemetry and JReleaser, you don't need Quarkus for it. It just makes it a little bit easier. And I showed you MicroProfile as the spec for cloud-native applications and Micrometer. And so I hope that I was able to inspire you a little bit in this session to use some of these tools. If you want to use that Kubernetes environment that I was using, well, you can just go to developers.redhat.com, create a free account, and you have this OpenShift sandbox where you can just deploy things to and play around with. If you have, if you're running Java 8, for example, and you want to modernize your Java application, there's a free book that you can download through this link that's actually written by my colleagues, Natale and Marcus. So, definitely, if you want to check it out, get a free download of the book. And I'll give you just a second. I see some people taking a picture. So don't you hate when they're like, yeah, here's some links, and then they just like, and nobody had time to take a picture. All right, so hopefully you had. Here's the link to the slides, I hope. I didn't test it out, but it should be working. If not, if anybody gives me a holler, then I'll post it on Twitter or whatever. So here you have the slides. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter or on Blue Sky even, or I have a YouTube channel and everything, so you can find things there. So let's go look real quick to see that my release was created, and now we need to release it, right? So let's do that real quick with p release JReleaser full release. And so now, Maven W. So now I'm going to release my new version of my application. So it's going to push it to my GitHub, going to create the checksums, push that distribution, and it's going to create a notification on Mastodon that my application was pushed. So let's look at that real quick, and then we're out of time. So I'll go here real quick to Mastodon. Oops, sorry, mastodon.social. And you can see Quarkus JReleaser, blah, 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 has been released. So it actually did work, right? So anyway, sorry for going a little bit over time. Thank you for joining my session. And I have Quarkus stickers here. So come and get your Quarkus stickers. And thank you.